Today is a really special morning because this morning we're going to try to cover two stories, okay? And that will take up the duration of the meeting. Two stories of Abraham, and this is our last meeting on Abraham. So if you want to go back and look at what we discussed last week, that video is recorded. But this week we're talking about two really important and really famous narratives, right? Can anyone guess what those are? Yeah, Abraham and Isaac, that would be one of them. So the story of what's called the binding of Isaac, oftentimes titled the sacrifice of Isaac, right? Because is Isaac sacrificed? He's offered up as a sacrifice, but the sacrifice is not made. So it's traditionally called the binding of Isaac. And we'll get more into why that is and what that means. And then the other story is going to be the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? Which is a really, really famous story, right? And a stock reference story in the Bible that is referenced all the time later in Scripture, and also referenced in just popular culture sometimes. You know what I mean? The idea of these great cities, these very wealthy cities that have great kings that are thrown down in this calamity, right? In this great catastrophe. Just off the bat, is that bearing resemblance, what I just said, this great city thrown down by a catastrophe, is that bearing resemblance with anything that we've covered so far?
Oh, Babylon.
Okay, the Tower of Babel and the scattering of the nations at Babel, and then maybe one other thing? It's the same kind of thing, the theme of judgment, but I'm thinking of Noah's flood. Yeah, the Noah's Ark and Noah's flood, right? So the idea of a great, fantastic human civilization, a wealthy, decadent human civilization, a violent civilization that is thrown down by God in a calamity, right? What's interesting is, as far as elemental forces are concerned, the way that Sodom is thrown down is the opposite of the way that the world of the flood is thrown down, right? Water and fire. There's a reason for that, and we'll get into that. Hi, Brenda. Good morning. Good. Good morning to you. So, we are going to go ahead and get into the slides today. I think I'm going to be able to pull the scripture up on the screen. I know I didn't do that last week, so I think I'm going to be able to do that now. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do a couple slides before we get into the reading, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So we're talking about the test of Abraham. What do Abraham and Sarai, or Abram and Sarai, as they're called at the start of the journey, what are they representing in the story? Do you guys remember what we talked about last week? What is their role as we focus in on all of the nations? They've been scattered, and now we're focusing in on a couple. What does that resemble? What does that represent? The chosen ones? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the election of God, or the selection of Abraham and Sarai, or Sarah, to be the people in whom the whole world will receive blessing, okay? And remember how we talked about that? That is per what Paul says in Galatians. That is what the gospel is, okay? That's probably the simplest form of the gospel, is that in the representative, in the one, the many receive blessing, okay? Christ is the representative one in whom we all receive an inheritance of salvation, right? As Paul says, we are co-heirs, receiving from Christ, or with Christ, what he earned on the cross through perfect obedience, okay? So are you guys seeing that that is the case with Abraham? Abraham is the representative one in whom the nations, it says, in you, all the families, in your family, all the families will be blessed, right? So the idea, and just so that I drive this home, the idea is that Abraham, Jesus, these figures of the elect of God, you could say everyone from Abraham to Jesus, they go through a story that I might not go through, right, in my lifetime. Theoretically, I will go through the same patterns, but all the way through that whole narrative of election, they go through a story that I might not go through, but the credit of that story is accredited to me. Okay, so this is the imputed righteousness of Christ, right? That he lived a perfect life, died a perfect death, and God says it is as though you, if you put your trust in Christ, if you come underneath his redemption, it is as though you also went through that story. Okay. And so that's what the point of the representative one is, the perfect one, the election or the selection of God, the one on behalf all of humanity is represented. Okay. And of course, Abraham and everyone after Abraham doesn't live a perfect life, doesn't die a perfect death, right? But they are the people which lead to the anointed one, the chosen one, which means Messiah or Christ in Greek, the one in whom we all receive salvation, inheritance, blessing. Okay? Inheritance of eternal life. Does that make sense, guys? So I want you to, when you're reading Genesis chapter 12 and these following chapters, recognize that you're reading the same Bible. Okay? And whenever you go in your life to read Genesis later on in your life, you should see this entire narrative as one narrative, right? That what God is doing in Abraham is what God will do in Christ in the New Testament, right? Just to its fullness, to its completion, to its perfection. Okay? That is the story of Israel. That is the story of Jesus representing Israel. Um, you could say Israel out of the nations represents the one nation out of many nations, right? That is on behalf of all nations. And then Jesus on behalf of Israel, right? So a honing in. We'll talk more about election next time. So what does Abraham do when he enters the promised land? Do you guys remember? What's his? He builds altars, right? So good morning. So number one thing that Abraham does when he enters the promised land, his first order of business is to build altars, right? Remember that that is a sort of ancient way of planting flags, okay? If you build an altar to a specific god, you are building a place of worship for that god. You're representing that that god is now taking up residence in this area, right? And that the worship, the spirit of that being is now being claimed in the land. And as the altar builder, you become essentially the founder of a civilization in that land. Uh, it's like planting flags, but it's also more than that because flags are just symbols, but altars are where you get number one, light from fire and food from cooking the sacrificial animal, okay, and eating it, right? So this foundation stone, you could say, of a civilization would be an altar, okay? And so he's building up the land of Israel, okay? You could say he's building up the city that has foundations, right? The one in which God said, "Go to this land, your descendants will inhabit this land." And it is through this land that the story of salvation is going to take place, okay? You could say the same sort of thing that's going on with Abraham. Out of all the nations, Abraham is selected. Out of all the landmass of the world, this location. Okay. What's significant about this location? Do you guys remember we've discussed just geographically speaking? It's very central. Yeah. So it's a land bridge between three continents. It's got the Arabian Desert on the east, so you can't travel through the Arabian Desert in the ancient world. You're going to die. Um, and I mean, unless you're very well prepared. I'm not saying that people didn't do it, and then you have the Mediterranean Sea on the west. Okay. Yeah, they did travel, but that's sort of the miracle of the story, right? Is they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, right? And they every time they think they're going to die, right? But so if you want to get to Europe from Africa, you travel through the land of Israel. If you want to get to Europe to Africa, you travel through the land of Israel. If you want to get from Africa to Asia and vice versa, right? So it's this connection point, this trade route, you could say, between all these different locations, right? And why is that important as we go through the text? It's from this location that God is going to radiate out his kingdom, right? From a central location. The message that goes to the nations that Jesus Christ is king comes from a central location, right? And so we'll get more into that as we get into the gospel narratives, okay? So he's planting flags in the central location, right? This is the land of Yahweh, the Most High God. He also conquers a bunch of Babylonian kings, if you guys remember. He drives them out of the land as they're attacking. He defeats them in battle. And then what is significant about that? What happens after that big battle that he joins between the War of the Five Kings?
Blessed by Melchizedek.
Yes, so the story of Melchizedek. Yeah. What's significant about Melchizedek?
You were saying that's like the most historical or true priesthood?
Well, yeah. So the idea here is that throughout the text of the scripture, there's the thing called the priesthood. Most of the time, it's talking about what's called the Levitical priesthood. The priesthood of the people. Yeah, right. That's a temporary priesthood. The people of the tribe of Levi, who are the priests of Israel, right? But they're only priests on behalf of Israel, the nation, right? But Jesus's priesthood later on in the Bible is said to be a priesthood on behalf of Melchizedek, right? Who's a Canaanite priest, and a priesthood that is earlier, more ancient, in line with the priesthood on behalf of all of humanity, right? A priesthood on behalf of not just Israel, but Israel and the nations, right? And so what Melchizedek is doing is he's handing off that priestly role to Abraham, right? And he's blessing, it's a Canaanite king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, right? So the king of Jerusalem, who is a king priest, he's a type of Christ, right? These are all the roles that Christ is going to fulfill, that Jesus will fulfill later on in the Bible, okay? So all of these little things. The Abrahamic covenant is given in the last meeting, right? What's significant about that is that this person, this human, is said that your offspring will be like the stars, right? So it's not just as numerous, it's not just as multiplied as the stars, but your offspring will also be as glorious as the stars. And we talked about that, that later prophecies in the Bible are going to talk about the resurrection state as being a state of glory, right? A state of eternal life. And so we talked about that last week. Go and watch the recording if you want to catch up on that. And then finally, we had the story of Hagar. If you guys remember, that's sort of how we ended the story of Hagar and the circumcision that comes right after that. The story of Hagar is this promise is given to Abraham and Sarah that their offspring will be as multiplied and as glorious as the stars, as numerous and glorious as the stars. But they're getting antsy with it, right? That they're getting a little bit impatient. And so what do? They say, we're going to see and take for ourselves what God has already promised, but in our own time, in our own way, right? We're going to manufacture, we're going to create an artificial circumstance in which we're going to receive the blessing. And of course, that mirrors directly every fall moment that has already come, right? The seeing and taking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as the prime initial example of that, okay? And then what happens with Hagar? Such a significant moment. Do you guys remember what happens with Hagar?
Well, she gets cast out, but then it says like the holy angel comes and visits her. So he's notices her suffering, but to go back.
She's visited by the angel of the Lord. Angel of Yahweh, right?
Her son Ishmael. Yeah, he's gonna become a great nation.
He receives a similar blessing to Abraham. Yeah. Who is the angel of the Lord?
Jesus.
Okay, explain.
Oh, yeah, you gave descriptions like how you broke it down. Like they mentioned, different angels and stuff like that, but this one specifically, angel of the Lord. Yeah, you did a better job explaining.
No, that's all right.
Connecting the dots, aka it's Jesus.
All right, so so angel means messenger. Angel is a Greek term, okay? In the English, when we say angel, we mean spiritual being, right? We say spiritual being, but that's not what it has to mean in its original languages. In Greek, it's angelos, or malach, okay? Both of those words just mean messenger, okay? They doesn't mean spiritual being. So number one point to make there. So when you have if it was translated messenger of Yahweh, you wouldn't necessarily have to think that this is a created being, for one thing, because that is ultimately what it genuinely means, is messenger of Yahweh, right? What's significant about the messenger of Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, again, I'm just giving you how it actually, your translators they're using words that you're familiar with, but I'm just sort of trying to tell you what it actually is saying in the Hebrew. The messenger of Yahweh, angel of the Lord, speaks of himself as Most High God, as Yahweh, right? So, and we talked through this last week. When the angel of the Lord comes to visit Hagar, the angel of the Lord says to Hagar, I will make your son a great nation. I will bless your son in these ways. And then she says, how have I seen God and lived? And it says she called Yahweh there. You are El Roy, the God who sees me. So is this figure an angel, as we talk about it, right? A created spiritual being, a sort of visitor, a divine visitor? Or is it the Most High God? Is this Yahweh? Is this the creator in an appearance, right? In a visitation, an image, right? The angel of the Lord is the one who visits Moses in the burning bush. Okay, and I showed you guys that last week. It says the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in the burning bush. And when Yahweh saw that Moses turned to see what was in the bush, God called from the bush. That's just another example. Every time the angel of the Lord shows up in the text, the angel doesn't speak as though it's an angel as we talk about angels, okay? You do have angels in the Bible that show up and say, specifically, don't bow to me. Angel of the Lord never says that, okay? So remember, angel does not mean created being. The Hebrew word for messenger is what translates in your Bible to angel. Again, I think that hopefully there will be a trend where your translators start just translating angel of the Lord to messenger of the Lord or something like that, so that you don't get confused at what's happening here. In this story, we're going to have a lot more with the angel of the Lord. But
every instance of angel of the Lord then is,
you could say, in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the term "an angel of the Lord" is used in Greek.
I think it was used for like Elijah, right? When he was...
I don't know. I know that the angel of the Lord is, again, those Hebrew words. They show up time and again within the Hebrew text, and they're always referring to a being that refers to himself as God, right? In the same way that Jesus is the image of God on the earth, referring to himself as God, but also referring to his Father as God, right? So, hi, good morning.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you guys.
That's all right. So in the New Testament, Mary is visited by an angel of the Lord, right? But the language is a bit different, and it's Greek versus Hebrew, and we're talking about a specific being that throughout the text you don't have that pattern in the New Testament. Why not? Well, because Christ is incarnate at that point, right? So you're not going to have that pattern. Anyway, does that make sense, guys? We're gonna have more of that going on here. The point here is the idea of God the Father as unseen, right? All of these texts throughout the Bible that say no one has ever seen God, or you cannot see God and live. But then you have multitudes of instances where God is seen, right? So the same person who says no one has ever seen God, John says, but God the Son has made him known, has made him seen. In the same way you have in John 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, he was with God in the beginning, all things were created through him, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, right? So you have all these moments throughout the Old Testament, and the main point there, or at least one of the main points, is you might hear online from different people, like the idea of a multi-personal God is some sort of thing that develops over time, right? It's not in the Old Testament, so why do you believe this thing? It's a heresy, this idea that they would present. the standard Orthodox doctrine of the Trinity as somehow bunk, right? You just have to take them to the beginning of the Bible and all throughout the Bible, and you can have a million different examples to prove the idea of, in this passage in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the angel of Yahweh called down fire from Yahweh out of heaven. You know what I mean? And so you have two Yahweh figures there. And anyway, does that make sense, guys? All right, so we're going to get into the reading for today. Turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 18. And that was all just recap. And again, we got two stories to get through: Sodom and Gomorrah, the binding of Isaac. And hopefully there's some stories in between. We're just going to have to sort of pass over those smaller stories so that we could focus on the big ones. You guys ready? So Yahweh appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened to the tent, into the tent to Sarah, and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Hey, would you be able to close that door? Sorry. All right, picking up. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." Okay, so we're going to pause there and pick up where we left off here. Sorry, I keep messing up. Okay, so what's going on here? Abraham is in the desert. He's in by the oaks of Mamre in the south of Israel, which is a desert, okay? And he is living in his tent. And this is after the covenant. It's after the covenant of circumcision, right? And it's after his name is changed. This promise, this assertion, a reassertion of the promise of Abraham, of God to Abraham, is given, that this time next year, your wife will conceive. Okay, so it's been about 10 years, maybe more than that, since the original promise was given. But now we come to it at last, that God appears to him and says, "You are going to receive soon the promise that I offered you." And remember, for Abraham, this promise is the promise of blessing to all nations. It's not just him. It's the idea that God is doing something to save his people. He's doing something to save his creation and humanity. He's following up on the fall, that through us, all the nations are going to be blessed. Okay?
Who are the other 2 people?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, because it doesn't, we can only specify.
So there are 3 divine visitors that appear, right?
Could it be the Trinity?
Well, not quite. Okay. So there are some people that have drawn that connection, right? That, oh, these 3 represent the fullness of God, right? This Trinitarian, right?
What do you
Later on, these 2 figures are going to be the 2 figures. One of the figures is going to be called, so we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but one of the figures is going to be called the angel of the Lord, and the 2 are going to be called angels. Okay. So this is one of those examples where now you genuinely have these created spiritual beings, the host of heaven, who are visiting with Jesus, you could say, with the image of God, with the word of God, with the angel of the Lord. Huh?
There is entourage.
Yeah, the entourage. Yeah, the divine council, right? You could say these figures that come. I don't know. You could go wild and draw a connection. Oh, it's Gabriel and Michael. There you go. Let's just say it's Gabriel and Michael. But shoot, sorry, that scared me for a second. I thought that was like a fire alarm. Anyway, they're meeting God at. Yeah, we're gonna check it, Kaylin. So just ignore it. Sorry, guys. They're meeting God at a tree. This resembles the Garden of Eden, right? All of these times, hopefully you don't think it's trite that I keep saying this. This resembles the Garden of Eden. This is reminiscent of the cosmic mountain, right? I'm not the one who's coming up with these ideas. The point here is that these are design patterns of the Bible, that you have these divine meeting places. The altar is by the tree. The sacrifice is made on the altar, which is by the tree or near the garden realm, right? And so they're in a, there we go, it turned off, good. Now they're in a desert, but there's a oasis, right? They're in a desert, but there's a space where you can find shade underneath the tree. And Abraham is going to make a sacrifice, right? He grabs a calf. He says, let's make a grain offering. Let's do a drink offering. Let's offer these things up to these visitors. Now, this is really important about, and commentators have specified this over the generations, what he is displaying here. What is he displaying here in his welcome of these visitors? What is he showing?
That he knows who it is.
He knows who it is. Okay. That he recognizes God, you could say. He has a relationship and recognizes these visitors to be God. And then how does he act on behalf of these visitors?
Well, it says he rounds down and he kneels.
Okay, with worship and reverence, right? And again, an angel, if it was merely an angel, later on in the Bible, it would say, they would say, don't do that. You know what I mean? Don't worship created things, right? But the angel of the Lord claims worship for himself. But number one thing is he shows hospitality, okay? Hospitality. He's very hospitable to entertaining the divine visitor, okay? Entertaining the messenger, entertaining God visiting him, okay? This is going to be in contrast what is being presented here in the next chapter when the two angels visit Sodom and Gomorrah. You see what I'm saying? And they are inhospitable, right? Meaning they're not welcomed, but they are, in fact, the men of Sodom intend to sexually exploit them, okay? So there's a sort of contrast between the culture of Abraham's family and Abraham as a man of faith versus what's going to happen in Sodom and Gomorrah. The promise is given to Abraham and Sarah that next year, this time next year, is when it happens. So they've waited for years and years and years. And just think about the tragedy of the moment almost. Imagine you're a woman who has lived a lifetime of infertility, a lifetime of trying to get pregnant, right? And only now that you're old and advanced in years and a little rickety, right? That God is saying he's going to deliver that promise, right? So all of us can understand the laughter a little bit, right? Can understand are you serious? Now of all times, you're going to deliver, right? And what's significant about the laughter is this is not the first time God has been laughed at in his face. Abraham did this last week when we met. The same sort of thing. He laughs and he says, no, let Ishmael be the one. And he says, no, you're going to have a son through Sarah, okay? I'm going to make good on the promise that it's you, your original marriage, that is going to bear forth the child of promise. And what's significant about the laughter? Does anyone know? Abraham's son, Isaac, what does his name mean? It means laughter, okay? Yeah, it means laughter. And so the laughter is going to be really significant as a concept, okay? That there's what seems like a hopeless situation, that turns into a deliverance, right? That's represented in the story, you could say the life of Sarah. Desperation, infertility for an entire lifetime that somehow results in the son of promise, the one in whom all infertility will be abolished, you could say, right? The idea that the curse of woman, right, which is in the garden, the idea in toil you will bring forth children, right? The idea that because of the fall there will be trouble in your life, in your fruit-bearing activities, that there will be sadness, that curse will be reversed in the seed of the woman who will crush the serpent. Okay, so and that is very significant in the story, and it's going to be manifest in the story of Isaac, right? That there's this moment of desperation. Isaac is about to be slain on the altar, and then a reverse, right? A moment of resolution that comes unexpectedly, right? And you could say the same thing is true in the death and resurrection of Jesus himself. Okay. So we're going to get more into that in a few minutes, but just take note of this laughter, this idea of a disbelief, a sort of, but not even in a way that we're supposed to even necessarily look down on Sarah, I don't think. The point here is that it's very natural and expected that it's like, oh my goodness, are you serious? Now, this moment, and that there's a laughter, there's a joy, but a disbelief joy that comes from it. Okay,
Maybe like a nervous laugh.
a nervous laugh, yeah. And I'll talk more about that as we get more into that name in just a few slides. Well, in fact, I'll probably get into it right now. Just remember, the angel of the Lord, I've covered this already, is what we call a Christophany. So God is here. God, Jesus, the Son, the Word is present. The angel of the Lord is present, giving this message. And this is what I'm getting at here is with this story about this laughter, this resolution, this sudden thing. It's a word invented by J.R.R. Tolkien, this word Eucatastrophe. Has anyone heard this before? So jumping outside of the biblical text a little bit, but just showing you sort of something that you can think about as you read the biblical text. J.R.R. Tolkien observed in the Bible this pattern of this term called eucatastrophe, what he calls a good catastrophe, right? So a catastrophe is a moment at which something unexpected and monumental happens, something very significant, a big deal. Normally by catastrophe, we mean a big calamitous destruction, right? Something awful happens, but again, suddenly, right? And by the end of it, you're just like, it's a whirlwind, right? You have, what is that term that people use when like their neck, whiplash. You have whiplash, right? At like what just happened, right? So eucatastrophe is a sudden and favorable resolution of the events of a story, right? This sort of turn of events, a happy ending, right? And you can see this in his stories if you enjoy The Lord of the Rings. But I just want to present to you eucatastrophe in the story of Isaac because that is what it represents, right? So Sarah laughed, right? This word, this Hebrew word, which is Isaac's name. And she says, now that I'm old, now will I have this pleasure or this delight. It's the same word for Eden, okay? Remember, Eden, the garden of delight, the garden of pleasure, right? And then, is anything too wonderful or marvelous for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, and you shall have a son. And then she said, God has brought me laughter, right? And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me, is something that she says, right? So God's power brings laughter and delight when it is least expected. At the moment at which you think, I will never get this thing. I will never receive the promise, the deliverance of the promise that was given to me. That is the moment at which there's a sudden turn of events, right? There's the holdout of faith to the moment at which there's a turnaround, okay? Now, I want you to just look forward to what we're talking about with the binding of Isaac. So when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac. Laughter, right? And then he's going to slay Isaac. And then the angel of the Lord calls from heaven and says, you have not withheld your son from me. So at the final second, the son, laughter, is spared, right? And as Hebrews says, is raised to life, right? Is figuratively speaking, raised to life. And a substitute sacrifice is offered in his place. That is the ram, right? We'll get into this later. Now I want to turn, we're jumping around a little bit, but I want to turn your attention to another instance in the Bible where laughter is spoken of in Psalm chapter 2. Okay, I'm going to read to you Psalm chapter 2. This is a very significant psalm because it is a psalm talking about the anointed one, the Messiah, as the Son of the Most High. Okay, so let me just read it for you. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his Messiah, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. Okay, so the Messiah is identified as the Son of God, the one who laughs. God is the one who laughs at the nations who conspire against the Lord and his Messiah, right? And the Son of God is the anointed one, the Messiah, right? Whom will receive the nations. Are you guys starting to make these connections here, right? The Son, laughter, the nations receiving an inheritance of blessing, right? And the substitute sacrifice, of course, is the Son of God, right? So for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. And then later on, in chapter 2 of Acts, God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold of him. So the Son of God is given as a substitute sacrifice for the world and is raised to life, as Isaac was figuratively raised to life in the story of the binding of Isaac. Okay, so bringing all this together, the resurrection of the Son of God is the ultimate Eucatastrophe. Okay, right? So the barren woman receiving the blessing of childbearing, right, is a Eucatastrophe. Isaac receiving life, being raised to life figuratively after the binding, is that same Eucatastrophe. The resurrection of the Son of God is the Eucatastrophe. It's the unexpected, sudden, and happy resolution which reopens the gates to the garden, right? The culmination of the one who laughs in heaven, right? The plan of the one who laughs in heaven. This pattern of Eucatastrophe begins with the birth of the Son of Promise, who is his name, Laughter. Okay, you guys see what I'm saying? When we laugh, anyone who has ever laughed always laughs because it's a joyful and an unexpected joy. Okay? You don't laugh because you expect to laugh. When a punchline is given of a joke, it's something that you weren't expecting. It's witty. When you laugh out of great joy because of a sudden turn of events, right? That's a natural experience that hopefully we've had. It's this idea that laughter and joy comes greatest. And just think about it. Laughter is not a natural thing. Laughter is not like a thing that you would expect a creature to do. Okay? What is the functional purpose of laughter? What is the functional purpose of crying? You could say is the opposite. There are expressions of emotions, right? You would say they're two opposite expressions of emotions. And it always comes through this sort of great joy, this unexpected joy, right? So I want to read from a church father. His name is Ambrose from the 4th century. And he says, an aged woman who was sterile brought him to birth according to God's promise, so that we might believe that God has the power to bring it about, even that a virgin may give birth. He was offered for a sacrifice in a singular fashion, that he might not be lost to his father and yet might fulfill the sacrifice. Likewise, by his very name, he prefigures grace. For Isaac means laughter, and laughter is the sign of joy. That's something else that we need to point at when we're talking about this sudden favorable turn of events. it's only by the grace of God that these events would happen, right? It's only God who could accomplish, because against all odds, Abraham and Sarah cannot bear a child themselves. Against all odds, Abraham is said to sacrifice his son, but it's only God who stops the knife. Against all odds, we cannot raise ourselves from the dead, okay? It's only the work and power of God who can accomplish these things. Now, everyone knows that Jesus is the joy of all, who checked the dread of fearsome death and took away its terror. So he stared death in the face and was not afraid, right? And became for all men the forgiveness of their sins. The one is named and the other denoted, the one portrayed and the other foretold. Okay? So you guys see how that story of Isaac, it's pointing forward to Jesus. When we get into the binding of Isaac, we're going to talk even more about this, okay? Any questions about that? I know that that was a little complicated, and I sort of brought in an extra biblical term to demonstrate for you, but that's what Tolkien was talking about, was this idea of a favorable resolution that is unexpected. That is and then the laughter that comes from it, right? That is what's being shown in the story of Sarah, right? And that's what's being shown in the story of Isaac. And I just want you to think about that in regards to your own life. The times in which you're looking for a deliverance on the promise, the times in which you are looking for God's plan to come to fruition, about how that is the pattern of all who walk with God, right? Even Christ himself had to die in order to be raised, you could say, coming to the end of himself for the Spirit to raise him, that he emptied himself to the point of death. That is the moment, you could say, as presented in the Bible, the moment at which God delivers is when you are incapable of delivering. I just want one more thing on the name of Isaac. Yishmael means God will hear. Isaac means laughter. Okay? So the son who is born in iniquity, right? It means God will hear. Okay? Remember, she called him El Roy, meaning God will see me. Also, have I seen the God who sees me? God will hear. So that's the name of the gentilic son of Abraham. Okay? So the one who is not the chosen one, but the one of the nations, right? And then Isaac is laughter, right? The name of the son of promise, the chosen son. Okay? The mission and the vision of God is that these two separate entities, the chosen and the nations, will be united. Okay? So Ephesians chapter 2, his purpose was to create in himself one humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body reconcile both of them to God, right? Jew and Gentile, nation and Israel, or nations and Israel. Okay? So, and I just think it's really interesting when you pair the names. God will hear laughter. So, pretty cool, right? Anyway, I just think that that's significant. And hopefully I'm driving home to you guys sort of these hidden patterns in the text that are enlightening to you the point, right? That when these two finally are united, you could say, in Christ, Jew and Gentile, right? Isaac and Ishmael, that the brotherly rivalry that is born out of the sin in their lives will come to fruition, will be delivered, and at that moment, God will hear laughter. Okay? All right. So now we're getting into the story of Sodom, okay? And we'll get back to the binding of Isaac, but I just wanted to focus on the laughter aspect. When you think about Isaac, think about joy, laughter, sudden, favorable outcome, right? The laughter that comes through the resurrection of the Son of God, okay? Okay, does that make sense? All right, let's move on. So we're moving on to, we're still in chapter 18, and we're picking up at verse 16, okay? Picking up at verse 16. Okay, you guys ready? The men set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom, and Abram went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. No, for I have chosen him, that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." pause here. So God is speaking to himself here, or you could say he is speaking to himself or to the angels with him. And he's saying, I'm about to do something great, but I should not keep it from my chosen one. I'm going to let him in to understand what is about to take place. And we're going to sort of be doing this thing together, which is the judgment of Sodom. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord, standing before Yahweh. So now here we are understanding that one of them is, it didn't say it before, but one of them is Yahweh, who is standing on the earth. Okay? So Almighty God is present, standing there before Abraham. Just think about the significance and the magnificence of that, the idea of the Son of God, or the Word of God, the one who is present on the earth. That is God, right? There's God in heaven, right? And then there's the image, right? The image of God who appears to Abraham and standing with him. And then the two men go and they make their way to Sodom. Then Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will then you sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous are fair as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 50 of the righteous are lacking. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And he spoke to him, suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. And he said, O Lord, do not be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way, and when he had finished speaking to Abraham, Abraham returned to his place. So Abraham is bargaining with God, right?
Yeah, that's bold. Come on, like,
Let's just whittle it down, okay?
God is there.
Yeah, absolutely good opportunity. Yeah, well, and it's a on behalf of Abraham, it's a calling God what he is. Shall not the judge of all the earth be a just judge, right? And so, not necessarily testing God, but
he's pleading for humanity.
he is pleading on behalf of humanity, and he's stretching the bounds of the conversation to explore what is the nature of this justice, right? And God says, on behalf of the few, I will spare the many. On behalf of the few righteous, I will spare the many wicked. So we'll get into what that means. Any other thoughts about that before we move on with the slides?
It makes me think of like how little faith Abraham had of the other people.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I can't count any of you guys.
Gotcha. Yeah. He was like, I don't think that there's genuinely 50. So let's see how far we can get down. Yeah. That's funny.
That's good.
God's
Or that might
mercy.
take me a while.
Yeah, right. Sorry.
God's mercy.
His mercy. Okay. Speak to that a little bit.
His mercy to hear him plead with God, like, Lord, if it only be 2,
Mm-hmm.
and God's mercy said, basically, like, I will have mercy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the sin of Sodom? What is the sin of these cities? What's wrong with them?
Well, I guess it was.
Homosexual was in it.
Well, so sorry. Let's have more. Keep going, and then we'll evaluate all of them.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, they're homosexual, but it was primarily self-indulgence.
Okay.
I was just saying it was godless.
Mm-hmm. godless.
Mhm.
So, a traditional way of presenting this, because this is how our language has worked throughout history, is a sodomite, right? What's a sodomite? A sodomite is a homosexual male, okay? Or the sin of sodomy, or the breaking the law of sodomy, right, is the act of homosexuality. The problem with that is that nature of the story of the men who are wanting to gang rape these angels, right? That comes as a you could say as a consequence, or as a fulfillment or a fullness of a sin that is already there. Okay, so I just want to go back to Romans 1 and talk about what it is it say. It says they worshipped created things rather than the Creator. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their flesh, and they defiled themselves, men having relations with men, women having relations with women, these things, okay? So the idea here is that is almost like the ultimate symptom, okay, of a more foundational sin. Okay? Does that make sense? That's sort of what I'm trying to present to you, because when the Bible talks about the sin of Sodom, it never actually mentions the fact that the gang wants to rape the angels. Okay? That's never said. Later on in the Bible, you could say, when it's looking back. What is said, for example, in the book of Ezekiel, is said the guilt of Sodom, she and her daughters had pride, excess of food, prosperous ease, did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. Okay? So think about this. What is going on in the story is the symptom of the gang rape, you could say, of what is going on when the angels visit the city of Sodom. That is an outgrowth, right? It's a cancerous outgrowth of a deeper issue, which is decadence. Decadence and great wealth is the more foundational issue. And I just want you to think about America for a second, okay? That our sin of our sexual ethics sins, okay? They are outgrowths or symptoms of deeper rooted problems, okay? I just want you guys to recognize this. The inequality of decadence, right? Great wealth, decadence of the people of power, and the desperation of the poor and needy, right? A wealth disparity, okay? Really, really interesting that the Bible is presenting that, okay? So just sort of keep that in mind, that this later sin of sodomy, that later people will call it, is an outgrowth of that more fundamental issue. Okay. I want you guys to recognize also in this story that God does not judge from far away. Okay. He doesn't judge callously. He doesn't judge without going to see for himself. Right. Now, of course, God is omnipresent and he sees all. But the idea is his personal presence goes to look on behalf of the city first, right? This happens at Babel. So the Lord went down to look at the tower and see what they had built, and then he judges. And the same thing is the angel of the Lord is going down with his angels to Sodom to behold the sin and then render judgment, okay? And I also want you to recognize the nature of God as being willing to spare all on behalf of the few. What do you think about that? God is willing to spare everyone on behalf of just a few righteous.
It makes me think about how we often have this feeling of when there's a wrong done, why is not justice swift? Or why do we have to wait so long for God to execute his justice when something is wrong? Or even the idea of like why does pain and suffering continue on the earth? But it's this idea that God is long suffering, he waits, he's patient, so much more than we can imagine as an eternal being. And it just makes me think about that idea of like we are so like quick to like want things to happen, but it's actually God's mercy that allows for time and to spare those that may come to him.
Yeah.
just that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. The idea here is that there is sin in every single one of us, right? No one is righteous, not one does good, not one, as later Bible verses will say, right? And so for God to spare the many on behalf of the righteous, right? It's the story of God's patience with humanity generally, okay? It's what it means for God to have a righteous remnant who continues on behalf of humanity, this mercy of God, right? That it's the righteous who are, you could say, holding back, right? That they are the bulwark against the wrath of God, you could say. Now, as we get through the story of the Bible, there is one who is genuinely righteous in and of himself, right? Who is that?
Jesus.
Who holds back the wrath of God, who is a bulwark against the wrath of God, right? It is for the sake of Christ, right? If you confess me on earth, I will confess you before my Father in heaven. This idea that for Christ, for the sake of the Son, that humanity is spared, okay? So I just want you to sort of think about that idea that the righteous are the ones who spare the unrighteous, okay? And that is most true in Jesus, right? But it's also true just on a pattern of, let's say a pattern of history or a pattern of the story of history, that when you have just a few just a few righteous, just a few good people, right? And I just mean like wholesome people in a place, there's still hope for that place. Ultimately, Lot and his daughters and his family are going to be pulled out, which are the ones who are deemed to be spared. But why should we be present in Sin City? Okay, is my question for you. Why should we be present on Sin City? Because God will spare the unrighteous on behalf of the righteous. Okay? And I just think that the idea here is that there is hope for the city of Sodom, should the righteous remain there. Does that make sense, guys? There is hope for the world as long as the church is in it. Okay? And we shouldn't flee to the hills. We're not sectarian. Ultimately, Lot and his daughters do end up having to flee to the hills, right? But I think you guys are understanding what I'm saying here. God is not going to just destroy everything. God is merciful because of his love for his son, who you are in. Okay? Cool. So let's continue in the reading. Verse 1 of chapter 19. Turn your Bibles to that, or you can look up here. The two angels, so there we go. These two men, it said two men, but now they're two angels. Okay? So now we have confirmed officially the three men who visited. It was sort of a careful or measured unveiling of who these figures are, right? So one is the Lord, one is Yahweh, and there are two angels. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. Remember, Lot is Abraham's nephew, right? When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet so that you can rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the square, in the town square." Okay? Very significant. But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So Lot, the nephew, resembles his uncle, Abraham, right? He's showing hospitality to these individuals, to these visitors, right? But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." So now Lot is on the outside of the house while the angels are on the inside of the house. And the men of the house are forming a riot around the house, okay? And they say that they want to essentially, as I have said, gang rape them, okay? That word, so that we may know them, right, is this idea that we want to take these visitors and we want to sexually exploit them. So you have the hospitality of Abraham and of Lot, and the inhospitality of the angels, right? What is hospitality? Hospitality is this idea that I am my brother's keeper, right? Even if they're a stranger, right? That if someone arrives into my space, I am duty bound to honor them as an image of God, right? I'm duty bound not to reject them, but to receive them. Okay. It's the same thing as, I was in prison and you fed me. I was poor and you clothed me, right? This idea of hospitality is the idea of the kingdom, right? The kingdom is the ultimate hospitable place. Okay. So, but here's what Lot says. Look, I have 2 daughters that have not known a man. They're virgins. So let me bring them out to you, and you can do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. So he's almost hospitable to a fault, you could say, is what my argument would be. So they've come under my care, so I'm going to throw under the bus my daughters who are under my care. Okay. And there's going to be repercussions of this model, because they are ultimately, the Bible is dark sometimes, guys. Later on in this story, his daughters are going to rape him. Okay. And it's just, they're going to get him drunk and they're going to have sex with him. Unwittingly. Okay. So and this is what I said last week. Oftentimes these stories of sin, of these relational brokenness, it's the men throwing the women under the bus, right? How awful they treat the women, and then sort of how the relationships break apart from there. Okay, but they replied, so this is after what he says about the daughters, but they replied, stand back. And they said, this fellow came here as an alien, and he would play the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. They're speaking of Lot here because he's an immigrant to the city of Sodom, okay? So he's saying, he's judging us for what we're going to do to these men, okay? So we're going to take him out too, right? Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to the door to break it down. So just try to imagine in your brain this surge of people, this riot, right? That's coming and trying to break into the house where the 2 angels are stationed there with Lot's family, okay? Then they pressed hard against Lot, came near to the door and to break it down. The men inside, so the angels, the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they were unable to find the door. So these angelic beings with supernatural power, boom, this riot is now feeling around in the dark. They're all blind, right? So then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against his people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out, said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters. So these were betrothed daughters too. Just wild, wild story. Up out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed his sons-in-law to be joking. Okay, so they're not going to leave, right? The sons-in-law. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or else you will be consumed in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, they said, flee for your life, do not look back or stop anywhere in the plain, flee to the hills, or else you will be consumed. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, your servant has found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life, but I cannot flee to the hills, for fear of disaster will overtake me, and I die. Look, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. He said to them, to him, very well, I grant you this favor too, and will not overthrow the city which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Pause. So this is what I was saying. God is acting out that mercy. He's sparing a city. So Lot is taken out of Sodom because Sodom has become such a hostile place that now they are going to kill the righteous who is there, right? Again, righteous, he's doing these awful things. The righteousness does not come through what they do. It comes through their faith, right? But the idea here is that he is now being driven out of Sodom, but now he will go to a city that is spared. So God is is actually acting out that promise that if there is righteous found in the city, I will spare that city, right? Okay, so here we go. And you guys remember that archaeology video? So now we're reading that story. So if you didn't see it, go back to it because it's an amazing video of the ruins of 4 cities that are burned in the fire of the sulfur, and it's all there, and then the one city that was spared, right? All right, here we go. Then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and saw the smoke of the land going up from the smoke, like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham, and he sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had settled. And then just very briefly, now Lot went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He lived in a cave with his 2 daughters, and his firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, there is not a man on the earth to come into us after the manner of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine. We will lie with him so that he may preserve offspring through our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in, lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Look, I lay with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. You will go and lie with him so that we may preserve offspring through our father." So they made their father drink wine, and the younger rose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day. So the origin of Moabites and Ammonites are through this really, really dark, awful story. Okay? All right, so let's move on, going back to the slides, and just get through more of this. We'll be done in 30 minutes. Okay?
I hate to dread, but why they were supposed to be betrothed to other parts of the family, so I don't know. I don't see why they were going to already be betrothed.
The sons were killed in Sodom, or the sons-in-law. Yeah, the sons-in-law. Yeah, so they did not believe Lot. Yeah, they didn't believe him. They thought he was crazy. Yeah. Yep. Any other thoughts? Again, pretty dramatic story that we just read.
Did they actually, when at the beginning of 19, when it says that the 2 angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom, at that time did Lot know that they were angels, like because they physically were angels? Because it never says they announced themselves
as angels.
Because when I had first read it, it was more like because he was an immigrant to that place, he saw these new people coming, thinking oh well, I could help them because I've been in their shoes. Because then it made me think of if the people living there could visibly see that they were angels, did that increase their desire to be with them?
Sure. So a couple things. Yeah, he's said to be in the city gate. He's almost not in the city, right? So he's on the margin. He's on the margin of the city, right? So very interesting placement there. Jude, Jesus's brother, in the book of Jude. Jude just means Judah, by the way. His real name's Judah. Jude, in the book of Jude says he compares the sin of Sodom to the sin of Genesis 6, the sons of God and the daughters of men story with the Nephilim. Okay, so that implies a acknowledgement on behalf of them, of the people of Sodom. He says they went after strange flesh, okay, or obscure flesh, okay. You could say so that implies that the Sodomites know that these are angelic beings or something like that. It is a sort of mysterious. Lot obviously knows and at some point they all come to this knowledge because he recognizes that these are ones who will be destroying the city, right? Or they are part of this crew that has come to destroy the city, right? With the power of the gods.
There's also see where there's like where Abraham is pleading with God to save, but then there's no communication between Abraham and Lot saying like,
Right.
so how, you know what I mean? Like that's why it was also kind of like, how did he know that they were evil?
Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah. And angels with bodies is a good question. You know what I mean? But they eat the food that Abraham offers. And and they grab Lot, they're not, ghosts, right? So there's something to be said there about that.
Behind the strangers, because we could be entertained.
Yeah. So, and the New Testament, that's okay. Hospitable. I forget which, it's either James or something, another brother of Jesus, says, you don't know if you're going to entertain an angel or not. And he's speaking to that hospitality, right? The idea of, be kind to your neighbor because you don't know who you're dealing with, right?
It's the two daughter-in-laws. Are they from the tribe of Moabites or?
They are the matriarchs of those tribes. Okay, so the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're going to be involved in stories later on, and so it's telling you sort of their origin story. Okay, does that make sense?
But they came from the.
Yeah. So yeah, they represent the Gentile nations, right? That are coming out of the chosen seed, in the same way that Ishmael comes out, is like, he's not the chosen seed, but he's born of Abraham. And yeah, what's most significant about the Moabites, and this is time and again what happens in the Bible, is this really, really radical, dark thing will happen, and then God redeems it by his son, redeems it by the Messiah, because a Moabite is going to be the grandmother of David. Okay. So I'm talking about the story of Ruth. Okay. And the book of Ruth is involving the Moabites. Okay. So every time you have a story where something like this happens, or very often, you could say the story of Tamar, the story of Bathsheba, this story, it's like, it's still the next stepping stone towards Jesus, which is really, really significant. So
when you talked about the sin of Sodom and our country and stuff,
Yeah.
I was going to say that, like, and this may be a little, I don't want to be graphic or anything, but sometimes when you see like celebrities or people talking about, one thing that comes to mind is when there was a quote, like an interview with Barbara Streisand talking about Michael Jackson, and she said something like, who you love is who you love, even if it's a child or something like that. And,
Gotcha. Wow.
Or you see other people talking about like, I'm pansexual now. Like I will love, gay, straight, trans, male, female, old, young. It speaks to this depravity of there's no boundary, right? And so you hear of child people. I mean, and they say like, if we don't hold back, where's it going to go next? To where there is no age of consent. Like what's going to happen? And I think of Sodom that way, not specifically like homosexual sin as much as what you said, as there's just no boundary, right? Depravity, like whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like, that's why you think about like what's happening in our culture. It's kind of crazy. Because as things become more mainstream and more acceptable, then the next thing becomes more acceptable, and the next thing becomes more acceptable, to where those boundaries of children or whatever they don't exist.
Desensitized, yeah. And I just want to present again, like per Romans 1, these things are consequences or symptoms of idolatry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so as our culture, as our world turns away, does not acknowledge,
idolatry and wealth inequality, and the idea that there's a great decadence at the same time. There's a great decadence at the same time. There's a great desensitization even to the poor, right? Or things like that.
Just to give guys like a little, just teeny, like, this was really interesting. So last week, Shane and I went to a youth camp, outreach camp for Young Life. And, anyway, and we were talking to the other adult guests there, and they were saying that we are in such a, like, is it post-Christian? Is
Mhm,
that what they
mhm.
call it? Society, that one of the children after the crosstalk, one of the kids said, "Oh, is that why people wear little plus signs around their neck, like on their chains?"
Yeah.
And another child said, I claim child, they were teenagers, was asked during their small group, during their cabin time, like, what, like, this may sound dumb, but what is prayer? Like, why are you, who are you talking to? Like, what is that? Like, there is no concept in so many families and so many kids that things like, like there's like, we talk to people like there's this underlying understanding in there, just isn't.
Yeah. So true.
So just to speak to
Yeah.
desensitization and
Yeah.
all of these things,
Yeah.
generations after generation are being raised with no concept.
Yeah. That's significant. And notice it said the young boys are the part of that riot that wants to gang rape the angels. So just speaking to that for a second. So God and Abraham are overlooking the cities. The angel of the Lord is, they're overlooking the cities. The two angels are going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, the normal ones that are mentioned. But there's, again, 5 total cities of the plain, these great cities. Interestingly, these are the cities that Abraham paired with last time to, go take on the kings of Babylon. And so there's a potential for sort of the person of blessing. Remember, whoever blesses you, I will bless. Whoever curses you, I will curse. Right? This idea of unification with Abraham could have spared these cities, right? The righteous could have spared the city, but that's not going to happen, obviously. So then they go into the city. They say, we're going to stay in the city courtyard. We're going to stay in the town square. But instead they go to Lot's house, right? So you're supposed to sort of theoretically imagine this idea of an intention to go toward the city square, right? But then they sort of veer off towards Lot's house, right? So the idea is the city square is where this gang is, right? That these people, they're attracting these people to them as they go to Lot's house, right? Now, I want you to recognize that Sodom is standing in a pattern of the cities of the Bible that are like the great evil cities, okay? Which is actually represented as, in the end, one evil city. Anyone know what city that is? Babylon. Okay, Babylon is the stock term used for these cities, right? But we're talking about multitudes of cities, okay, that are all representing the evil city, the city that is apostate, the city that is going to receive judgment. And I want you to think about this connection between the story we just read and this verse in Revelation. This is talking about the 2 witnesses who bear prophecy before the world which is to be destroyed, okay? And it says, from there, now when they have finished their testimony, the beast comes up from the abyss and will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. So the 2 witnesses their bodies will lie in the town square in the city that is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Okay? So is it Sodom? Is it Egypt? Is it Jerusalem? Is it Babylon? Or is it all one and the same, right? All one and the same. So this is what we talk about with the world, right? Right? Do not be of the world, right? For 3.5 days, some of the very people of the tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. So I just want you guys to recognize that the idea of Sodom represents the evil city, which will undergo a great catastrophe. The judgment of God will come upon after the 2 witnesses come to it. Okay? So I just want you guys to present that. Okay? And then I already brought up the Jude verse, right? So Jude, the angels did not keep their proper domain, but left their abode. He has reserved an everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. As Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities are around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality, gone after strange flesh. Okay, so there's his connection between Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim story, and the Sodom and Gomorrah story. And then we also had this scene with 2 Yahweh figures, right? Scene with 2 Yahweh figures. So the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Okay, so the Lord is standing there before Abraham. Yahweh is standing there before Abraham, looking over the cities. And then it says, that Lord, Yahweh, rain down burning sulfur in Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh out of heaven. Okay? Father and Son. Okay? When we're talking about the nature of the Trinity, right? I want to remind you how early we are in the Bible. I've said this multiple times now. You have these anti-Trinitarian sects or cults. These you wouldn't call them a denomination because they are subverting what the nature of God is, which is multi-personal Father and Son relationship, Father, Son, Spirit. Okay, and so you have that in the Old Testament too, in the earliest chapters of the Old Testament. Okay, just want to present that to you guys. And of course, we have the event, which is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Super important event because it's a type or a pattern that represents the fire that comes from heaven and consumes the evil city. Okay, this shows up time and again in the Bible, and it will show up in Revelation. It's a representative image of the ultimate judgments upon the world, right? Revelation and things of that nature. Okay. Story of Lot and his daughters resembles, so Lot, he's the nephew of Abraham. He's an immigrant. Along with Abraham, he's sexually victimized by his daughters, which is a connection with that story of Noah that we talked about in weeks prior. Remember how Noah is sexually victimized by Ham. And so also Lot. After a judgment, right? So a big judgment happens. Someone gets drunk and is sexually victimized. Right? That happens to Noah. That's happening to Lot. So the drunken rape of Lot by his daughters following the judgment of the cities of the plain closely mirrors the drunken sexual exploitation within Noah's family following the great flood judgment. Even though 4 prominent Canaanite cities have been destroyed by God, the conditions of their origin story is repeated. Okay, so remember, Canaan is the son that sort of comes out of this sexual exploitation, right? Their cities are now, these great Canaanite cities are destroyed, but the pattern repeats itself in Lot and his daughters, okay? The legacy of Ham's sin continues. The pattern of sexual exploitation goes on beyond the destruction of the Canaanite cities and gives way to the origin of the Moabite and Ammonite. Okay, 20 minutes to do the binding of Isaac. You guys ready? So story of Sodom and Gomorrah, lots of little connections that have been set up for the future. So just prepare yourselves for when we're going to follow up on Sodom and Gomorrah. How's everyone doing? That was a lot, right? We could just stop there. That was a lot. But we have to keep going. Okay? I'm sorry. We have to keep going. We got to finish with this story. Okay? So let's turn to Genesis chapter 21. We just have 2 chapters to get through, okay? I'm going to have to skip over the story of Genesis 20, unfortunately. But we'll continue, okay? So starting at verse 1 of chapter 21. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. So this is a year later after what we just read. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 800 years old when his son Isaac, 800, it was 800, not 800, was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. So, again, everyone, let's all laugh together. Ha 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 ha. Everyone who hears this story will laugh along. Enjoy now with Sarah, okay? And I already covered that at great length, okay? And she said, who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. I'm going to skip over Hagar and Ishmael's story. Oh, shoot. No, we got 22. So you read that. Now we got to 22. Okay, so go to the next chapter. All right, starting at verse 1 of chapter 22. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am," he said. "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "Yahweh will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of Yahweh it shall be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says Yahweh, because you have done this and have not withheld your only son, your son, I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Okay. All right. So very significant story that probably a lot of you are familiar with. So the binding of Isaac. Number one note. The first verse of this chapter. What does it say? God tested him. Tested him. So what does that mean? Number one, it means that God never intended for Isaac to die. Okay? That's number one. The first and foremost thing that the biblical author wants us to realize is the binding of Isaac was a test. It wasn't the real deal. Okay? And I want you to just think about this in context of other verses that repudiate child sacrifice as intensely as you can repudiate a sin in the Bible, okay? So you shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch, and so profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. You shall not worship Yahweh your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Okay? So whenever child sacrifice is described in the text, it's always this incredibly wild thing. I can't believe it, right? God is saying they even do this thing, okay? There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or is a sorcerer. So it's connected to witchcraft, right? Is the sacrifice of children. And he burned his son as an offering and used fortune telling and omens and dealt with the mediums and the necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. They built the high places of Baal in the valley of the son of Hinnom to offer up their sons and daughters to Molech, though I did not command them, nor did it enter into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. So God says, it's never entered my mind that a human being would be sacrificed in this way, okay? That a child would be sacrificed in this way. So this is why it's really important for you to recognize this whole story as a test. It's been presented in weird ways throughout sort of generations of interpretation. This whole thing never was an intention that Isaac would actually die. I want you to recognize what is the nature of this test, right? So God says to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. And then he goes next and he says, look around from where you are, from the north to the south, the east to west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So this promise that you're going to have this offspring. And in fact, that it is Isaac, who is the child, who will be the one who carries on the promise, right? Your wife Sarah will bear you a son. You will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant, so an eternal covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I've heard you. So Isaac is the chosen one. And then after all of this, he says, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. So the question of the test is, will Abraham follow through in fidelity and reverence of God's instruction and his promise, right? Or will Abraham take Isaac for himself, dramatically repeating the disobedience, right? So Isaac is this son of the promise, right? He is the one in whom the way to the garden will be established back, okay? And will Abraham believe that to be the case? Or will he, like in the way that he did with Hagar and Ishmael, will this be something that he takes for himself, the promise of God, right? But even more than that, it is the revealing of God's master plan of salvation. God will provide the lamb himself, okay? So it's not just about Abraham's faith. Does Abraham trust God? It is also about the acknowledgement that Abraham's trust is in what? In the provision of God, that God will offer the lamb himself. Okay? So remember, Abraham was building altars, right? This is his final altar, right? The binding of Isaac concludes Abraham's walkabout of the promised land. Shechem is where Jacob will dig a well. These are where his altars are built, okay? So Shechem is where Jacob will dig a well, and where Jesus will unveil his identity to the Samaritan woman in John's gospel. For the first time, he claims messiahhood, right? In Shechem. Bethel is where Jacob will receive the vision of the staircase to heaven, which Jesus will use as a symbol to describe himself. On me, you will see the angels of God ascending and descending. Hebron is where the ancestral family of Israel is buried, where they wait for their resurrection. And finally, on Mount Moriah, the patriarch builds his fourth and final altar. This is the mountain which will eventually become the temple, close to where Jesus is crucified, okay? So these altars are foundational places. Think about the planting of the flag, right? The story of Yahweh is happening in these places. And look at how significant these places are throughout the story of the Bible, where Abraham planted these altars. These are foundational places, right? All of the moments that are so important later happen in these places. Isn't that significant? Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I know. I have goosebumps as I tell you. It's incredible, right? So the same place that Abraham, 2,000 years before Jesus, is building an altar to the Lord and saying, this is the Lord's land, this is Yahweh's land and my people's land, is where Jesus is going to say, I am he who is speaking to you, right? To the woman at the well, okay? Same place where Jesus is going to be crucified is where the binding of Isaac happens, in the region of Moriah, right? On Mount Zion. Cool? Pretty incredible. Things I want you to notice also about the story. Then Abraham said, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship and we will come back to you. So what does that say?
We will come back.
Yeah. Abraham assumed and took for granted that he would return with his son Isaac.
What's interesting, do you have an idea on how old Isaac was? Because he's carrying...
Here we go. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. Isaac was old enough to carry wood used to build the altar. For some reason, people will convey this as though this is like a 2-year-old or a 9-month-old or why do they do that, right? So this is an older child.
Strong enough, like if he wanted to, could overpower.
He's a strong enough person, yes.
That's a lot of wood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not like a twig.
Isaac said to his father, where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Isaac was old enough to know about altar sacrifices and the nature of them. So as he's being bound, what does he think is going on here?
He's like, what are you doing, Dad?
I want you guys to imagine or interpret this. This is, I think, a right interpretation that Isaac is also a willing participant in this whole thing, right?
Well, I'm sure like over his lifetime, how many times his parents have told him this story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So maybe,
Yeah. That he will be the promised one. Yes. Or the chosen one. Yeah. The reason it's important for you to see Isaac as a willing participant is because this story is directly mirroring, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever should believe in him. But so no one takes my life, I lay it down willingly, right? So the idea of the Father and the Son together are types or mirrors of what God is going to do, right?
Well, this is symbolic. He's carrying, the wood for the.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is
Carrying the cross. Yep.
This is.
Yep. Mm-hmm. The wood on the sack, he's carrying the wood up to the mountain where he will be sacrificed, right? Which is what Jesus will do in the New Testament. God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So Abraham already believed. It's not like it's a surprise to Abraham when he sees the ram, okay? He expects this. So he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Isaac was willfully bound by Abraham in faith, okay?
Yeah, willfully.
So the book of Hebrews says it this way. He who had received the promises was ready to offer up his only son. He considered the fact that God is even able to raise someone from the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So the idea here is that Abraham's faith, and this is what was great about the video, guys. It's not about Abraham's faith in any obscure thing. Oh, he's willing to do whatever it takes, right? That's not it. That's not the thing. The faith is what he's placing his faith in, right? It's the identity of God that's important, not the identity of Abraham, right? All these other nations are willing to offer their children up as sacrifices. The problem is they're offering it up to a different God than this God. This is the God who raises the dead. This is the God who is offering his own sacrifice, right? God is the one who provides, and that is the faith of Abraham. It's not just, oh, I believe, I just have belief, right? It's not just belief for the sake of belief. It's belief in the provision, the God who provides, the God who offers his own sacrifice, the God who offers the way of atonement, right? It's the difference between works and grace, okay? Works says, I work my way up to God by doing great, remarkable things. Grace is gift. God is giving of himself the means by which relationship is established, okay? That's the difference. God is the one who does it versus I'm the one who does it. I'm the one who does it is works. God is the one who does it is grace. You are saved by grace through faith. It is not of works. It's not your doing. It's a gift, right? And the God who provides is the God that Abraham has his faith in. Jesus says something amazing in John chapter 8. He says, your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. And I would think that Jesus is talking about this story. What is the day of Jesus or the day of the Lord? It is the day in which he is offered. He offers himself as a sacrifice, right? And Abraham saw that day in his lifetime, right? The Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old. Have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So if anyone goes into the text, confronts you and says, where does Jesus claim to be God, right? Did Jesus ever claim? That's just one of many instances, right? So Abraham calls the place Yahweh Yireh, or Jehovah Jireh, okay? If you heard that. So the idea here is God provides the sacrifice, okay? God is the one who offers the lamb. God is the one who we are helpless before a righteous God, right? That's the point. We cannot work our way up to salvation, right? God is the one who has to provide a perfect sacrifice. We cannot offer any such perfect sacrifice, right? So what the ram represents is it represents God revealing of himself the nature of salvation, which is he provides the sacrifice. Again, that's the point. That is the gospel, right? That in God, in the representative one chosen by God, who is God himself, you are saved. It's not of your own doing, okay? This is what we mean by saved by grace through faith, okay? So the main point is not that Abraham's sacrifice was great enough. No, not even the sacrifice of one's own child can right their relationship with God. So you just think about this. It's the sacrifice of Isaac is supposed to be like the most foundational, like this is the most incredible sacrifice you could ever make. But even that sacrifice is not sufficient, right? So there's nothing that you can do in your life that would be great enough to right your relationship with God. Okay? It's not of your doing. It was through Abraham and Isaac's faith that they passed the test. Their faith in the perfect provision of God, who himself makes a way for us to have peace with him, right? And how does he do this? He makes peace with us by taking on our curse, by dying. We deserve death because of how we have treated God and our neighbor through our sin. But he makes a way by taking on our death, taking on our curse. Perfect example of this. Genesis chapter 3, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth. So the curse is estrangement from the earth, right? Estrangement from the land, estrangement from the place in which we are to dwell, right? Those thorns and thistles are that which the ram is caught by. Okay? Right? What does Jesus wear on the cross? Twisting together a crown of thorns they put on it. So he wears our curse as his crown. Okay? That is the defining feature of God, that he takes on our evil, our sin. He takes it upon himself and it becomes his crown, right? That's the thing that's his day of glory, right? Is that he atones for our sin by providing himself as a sacrifice, right? So we're talking about Easter, Good Friday and Easter all the way in Genesis chapter 22, okay? So as we get into the Gospels, we'll flesh this out even more. But you guys see what's going on here. How great the Father's love for us, right? That he should give his only son. Anyway, that's the other thing you have to think about is take your son, your only son, the one you love, right? So when Jesus is talking about the great love that he and the Father have before the foundation of the world, that's a much greater love than the love of Abraham for Isaac, right?
Well, in Matthew, when Jesus is baptized, God goes down, this is my son,
Whom I love.
and I'm well pleased.
Mm-hmm. Oh, man, it's amazing. Yeah. So excited to get later into the Gospels, and we'll get into those connections. Your offspring will possess the gates of their enemies. So this is a follow-up on the seed war, okay? So remember the seed of the woman, seed of the serpent, right? So I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He will strike your head, you will strike his heel. And then Genesis chapter 22, your seed shall conquer the gate of his enemies, and your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And of course, Jesus in Matthew 16 says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against my witnesses. Okay? So Isaac, he is the second-born of Abraham, but he's the firstborn by right? So he's the miraculous child born of Sarah. He's the second patriarch of the Hebrew people. He's the chosen father of the chosen people, and he is a type of Christ. He's one of the most significant types of Christ, right? The one who is offered as a sacrifice. But he's not Christ. A substitute is offered in his place. Christ, who is the Ram. Okay? Cool. And this is happening in the region of Zion. Okay? The region of Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, Mount Olives. This is where Jesus is going to be taking most of his actions of salvation, right? And where much of the Bible is going to be taking place. This is where Jerusalem was built. So this is the same place where Abraham met Melchizedek earlier on in the story, where he met the king priest, okay? That makes sense? And the mountain, of course, is a follow-up on the cosmic mountain, right? The Garden of Eden. So now they're on Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, which is where the temple will be built. So every sacrifice that is made in Jerusalem is made on this mountain. Every sacrifice that represents Jesus is made on this mountain, right? From the time of Abraham to the time of Jesus, okay? And of course, it is where... Now, for Jesus, it's interesting because it's the same region. It's not that same hill, but the point is he's taken out of Jerusalem. He's taken out of the city and sacrificed there, but it's the same area, okay? So the second temple, which was originally built by Zerubbabel after the exiles returned from Babylon, was further expanded and developed by King Herod. So this is what it looked like in the time of Jesus on the mountain. Okay, so this is the same mountain where this story happened, and this is where Jesus is turning over the tables in the temple, things like that. Today, it's the current state of the Temple Mount is very contentious and politically tricky. But you can go there, okay? And this is called the Dome of the Rock. It's a mosque that is built over. It was built in like the 800s or 900s. It's built over what is said to be the stone upon which the altar was built. Okay, so when you go there, you can see that. Later legends, say that this is the very stone upon which the whole world was created, right? And why do people say that? That sort of legendary way of talking about it should enlighten you to the idea that it's the same way of saying that Christ is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, right? That it is this stone, this sacrifice stone, right, upon which the provision of God comes that gives birth to the entire world, right? Or is the center of the entire world, right? It's amazing, amazing stuff. Okay, you guys ready to finish? I know that was a lot. Any questions before we finish? We have like 3 more verses to read, okay? But I just want to hear from you guys for a second. How does that make you feel?
It helps connect things.
Okay.
Just how awesome God is.
Okay.
How much He planned, like how orchestrated all this is
Mhm.
in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that he's an intentional God.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how much we make mistakes, what his plans are, he still used that situation for his glory, some way, somehow.
Mhm. Yeah. For you guys who have felt like the Bible is very, very foggy for you, like you're kind of wandering around in the dark, especially when you're in these earlier chapters, hopefully this is enlightening you to the fact that the Bible should be completely transparent to you when you understand how central Jesus is to the entire thing. Okay? Does that make sense? That everything in the Old Testament is looking forward to what comes in the New Testament. Okay? That the New Testament is taking all of these patterns, these types, these moments, these moments of God's revelation of himself, and it's bringing him and gathering them all up together in Jesus. Okay? That's what the Bible is. So, good. Let's finish by just reading through one more section, okay? So we're going to turn to chapter 23 now. Starting at verse 1. Sarah lived 127 years. This was the length of Sarah's life. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Abraham rose from beside his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a stranger and an alien residing among you. Give me property among you for a burying place so that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you any burial ground for burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land. He said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me for Ephron, son of Zohar, so that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of the field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as a possession for a burying place. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in the gate of his city, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed before the people of the land. He said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, If only you will listen to me, I will give you the price of the field. Accept it from me so that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, My lord, listen to me. A piece of land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed with Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the place of the hearing. He had named in the hearing of the Hittites 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area, passed to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, in the presence of all who went in at the gate of the city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it passed from the Hittites into Abraham's possession as a burial place. Okay. Last little section here, just a few slides. So owning the land. Abraham's only plot of land that he ever ended up owning in his lifetime. So he's in this council session before the Hittites, before this city, and its leaders, right? Its council members. And he is saying, I want to bury my dead. And Ephron the Hittite says, listen, this is not that expensive. I'll just give it to you as a gift. And Abraham says, no, I want to buy it. Why is that the case? I want the deed to the land officially. I want the right to the land officially because God promised me that I would own this land, right? The only plot of land that he ever owns is a burial place, okay? The area surrounding the tomb of his wife Sarah, which will also be the tomb of Isaac and his grandchildren, right? Jacob, and the matriarchs and the patriarchs of Israel. So the irony should not be overlooked. The land of promise is officially owned for the first time only for the purpose of burial of loved ones, right? So it's the deliverance of the promise of God, but also an experience of the curse, right? This day you shall surely die, right? So the Messiah has not come yet. The way back to the garden has not been achieved yet. So every time we have a moment in which this great revelation of this provision of God that will make a way back to the garden, you're going to experience also the curse still, right? And that is what's being displayed here is, okay, now we're transitioning, right? We're transitioning from a great moment, the binding of Isaac's story, and now we're transitioning to a loss, a grief, an experience of the curse, right? That we're still waiting for that Messiah, right? We've given a sign, a type, we've been given a sign and a type in Isaac, but the experience of the curse is still remaining. Now, it's a cave surrounded by trees, okay? It's a cave in a garden. Jesus' cave, Jesus is buried in a garden. It's called the Cave of the Naked Pair. Who are the naked pair? Adam and Eve, right? So this, and they come from the garden, right? Yeah. So Sarah and Abraham they're representing Adam and Eve, right? And every couple, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and Rachel, you could say, and Leah, there are these people of promise. The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, and they continue to be buried in the cave of the naked pair. And remember, this is a place that you can go today. We talked a little bit about this. Who watched that video? Yeah. So yeah, this building here was built by Herod the Great, who was king in the time of Jesus. But again, there were a ton of details telling you about where this place was. Again, they knew this. They built their shrines. They built their buildings. That's actually the most intact building. Lots of buildings by Herod the Great stand to this day. This is the most intact one. So very interesting. But I want to, at this point, give you guys the idea of Sheol, right? So the underworld. They are going into a cave. Why is that important? They're going into the underworld, right? Or they're going to hell, right? By this, I don't mean the eternal punishment of fire, hell. This is a different kind that we're talking about, the idea of death or the underworld, right? So ancient cosmology included as a byproduct of death, the underworld. To the ancient Hebrews, the result of death is the return to the earth from which humanity came. We already talked about this, right? Dust and ashes, created by God, by the breath of God. The form of Adam comes up out of the ground, and he will, to dust you shall return. Thus, being buried in caves and tombs symbolized the entrapment of the individual in the state of death. So when you die in ancient Israel, your body is laid in a tomb and the stone is rolled over the tomb. The idea is you are now locked in the underworld, okay? You're locked in the earth. You're locked in hell, right? So again, the resurrection, the whole Easter Sunday motif, it's following up on this idea of the burial, right? The cave and the burial in Israel. You're being set into the earth, locked in, right? And so when we say he set free the captives, Jesus set free the captives. And all of those who die are held in death's captivity. They are locked behind that rolled stone, okay? The Old Testament conception of post-mortem experience is different from contemporary conceptions. Namely, Sheol was understood, which just that's just the Hebrew word Sheol, which translates to the underworld, right? Or hell. Again, English, we have different ideas than what it's talking about. It was understood via phenomenological experience. Remember, humanity was taken from the earth and filled with the breath of God. Now, because of sin, humanity returns to the ground. The state of being under the earth was thought of as dark, dusty, murky, and watery, okay? Due to the chaos waters, right? There are waters above and waters below. And it can be accessed via wells and springs. Sheol is not to be confused with what is described as Gehenna in the New Testament. That's the fiery judgment, right? So those are two different things, right? We'll talk more about those. But the point here is the story of Abraham ends with both bitterness and hope. Sarah dies, having finally borne the son of promise, and yet this event results in ownership of the land of promise for the first time. What could be more poetic than ending the story of Abraham with the purchase of a tomb surrounded by trees? While exile from the Garden of Eden brought death, the promise of God to redeem humanity continues onward in the family of Abraham's seed. Okay, so Abraham and Sarah, they're locked, they're held captive behind the doors of death, right? That stone is rolled over the grave, right? When Jesus is resurrected, when the stone is rolled away, they are released from the captivity of death, okay? So every time the Bible talks about the death of these great figures, it's looking forward to the moment of the resurrection, okay? And I just want you to think about that. It's not just Jesus' resurrection that's involved in that. It's everyone that came before him, okay? That looks forward to that moment, okay? Cool? This was a really special morning, again, because it has so much to do with what comes later, okay? So any other questions? We actually finished right as church is starting this time. So it's because we got started early enough. So any other last thoughts, comments, questions, concerns?
Oh, it was really good.
Okay.
Yeah, just awesome to see how it all points to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. God bless you all. Thank you so much. And next time we're getting into the story of Jacob. So we've closed the book on Abraham, and now we're going into 2 weeks on Jacob, 2 weeks on the 12 sons, and then we'll be in the Exodus. So we're speeding up. Thank you, guys.